Hello, and welcome back to day two of the Grant Writing for Every Occasion workshop sponsored by YSHREB through funding provided by the NHPRC, the Wyoming State Archives, and the Wyoming State Library. My name is Sarah Davis, and I serve as the Wyoming State Archivist and YSHREB Coordinator. We just concluded session 4, Money, Money, Money. We are now on session 5, wrapping it all up. This session will go over the summary, presentation, documentation, and next steps for grant writing. This session will conclude at 10:30 a.m. and followed by a 30-minute break. Coming up at 11 a.m. is session 6, conversation with Dan Stokes. Dan will discuss identifying appropriate federal grant programs and creating applications tailored to particular programs. Again, this workshop is brought to you by the Wyoming State Historical Advisory Board and the Wyoming State Library. It is supported in part by an award from YSHREB through funding through the National Historic Publications and Records Commission, a division of the National Archives and Records Administration. The YSHREB program is administered by the Wyoming State Archives, which is a department of the State Parks and Cultural Resources. Our presenter for session 5 is Susan Mark. Susan Mark is the outreach librarian at the Wyoming State Library. Susan is one of 2 coordinators for the WSL's Federal Library Service and Technology Act grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. She's written grants successfully for nonprofits and state government agencies, managed grant contracts, served on grant review committees, and conducted grant writing workshops. Now I'll turn it over to Susan.
Good morning again. We are wrapping this up. You have done, if you have reached this point with your grant proposal, you've done an awful lot of work. We are going to get to the summary. And the summary is going to touch on all components of the grant proposal. It's written last, but it goes first. And I think by now you may realize why you have to do it this way, because you have to be solid on all the other components of your proposal before you can pull the highlights from them and craft a summary. It should be brief. It should be compelling. And I recommend that it leads with the needs statement. Really, again, if there's no problem, no reason to fix it, no reason for you to do it. So always start with the need. By compelling, there's a little bit of emotion to it. You really want to show that, people really need some help out there that you can fix. There's a problem you can fix. So let me go back to those elements of a grant proposal. And there was a question came up yesterday as to if you've just got a free form, they say just send you a proposal, how long these should be. And then I did some looking. There are other formats some people recommend. I will tell you what I would do. The summary, I would probably have it maybe half a page to a page. Organizational credibility, again, half a page to a page. I would recommend more like half a page in organizational credibility and give more breathing room to your summary. The need, the goal and objectives, the methods and the evaluation, I would lump those together all as the narrative, and I would give those 3 to 5 pages. Unless you are working on some kind of, 2-page preliminary proposal or letter of intent. And obviously, if you've got something like that, it's going to be, a lot more condensed, all of this. Your budget, probably no more than a page, depending on how the budget itself, the numbers, no more than a page. If it's elaborate enough, you need a kind of a narrative justification, maybe a page on that. And then, of course, whatever required attachments, your letters of support and those things. But as you write the summary, you are going to pull from every other section of your proposal. So one more time for the cheap seats, convince them this is going to be, the summary is going to be your elevator speech. You have to give them this complete grant logic in the one page. So what I want you to do is convince each other. I want you to go through, talk to each other about, and kind of do, I realize you would need a lot more thought in a summary you would actually need to put in an actual proposal, but kind of do a summary of your proposal. If you are watching this as a recording, pause the recording. Away we go. Okay, I think people are back. Did people have any takeaways, any insights, any questions coming out of this breakout? Were you convinced that somebody should be funded? Katie Bailey says everybody should get money. I agree. Linda Hurrigan agrees. I'm guessing there were some good projects in those rooms. Digitization grant, know how wonderful that was for their library. Good feedback on how to expand the justification. That's great. Wasn't aware sometimes using a friends group needed due to their 501c3. Yes, definitely. Not every funder will give to government. Some will, but not every funder will. Excited to hear about a grant for art camp, solar printing process. Oh, that sounds like fun. Take to outside locations such as a reservation. Let's move on. I will give you fair warning. This session might run a little long. We have a lot more ground to cover. But so you've done your summary, the writing is done. Then you look at common attachments. We talked about in session 1, getting your ducks in a row. And these are some of the things that we often see required by the grantor, key personnel who's going to be doing the work. Oftentimes they will want short bios or even resumes. There's nothing like updating your resume the day before a deadline. So you want to not procrastinate and kind of collect these things up front. Your letters of support, and we talked about that in a previous session. Your 501c3, if you're a nonprofit, your financials, and then again, you should be looking at the guidelines early on to see what attachments are allowed and what attachments are required. And I was mistaken, I'm talking about letters of support here, I misspoke. Your letters of support might include a concrete offer of support, such as another organization offering some volunteer time. Every one of them should have general enthusiasm for the project. They might have nothing else but that. It's going to be a stronger letter of support if they have more than that. It might be an organization that has greater insight into the problem. If you are wanting to work with a lower income population that has a need, and you find an organization that is also working with that same group and seeing the same need, they might have greater insight into it. Again, they might have an insight into the population served, who they are. Praise of your organization, that is going to bolster your organizational credibility. Or they might just promise to promote the project. We do a lot of that here at the State Library. We have very good communication channels with the library community. So oftentimes in a letter of support, we say, we will share this with the library community. So all of these things, they're going to bolster pieces of your proposal, but you have someone else saying it, which is very powerful. Some tips for letters of support. It is perfectly acceptable to draft the letter for them or even offer to write it for them. Find out kind of what they want to say, chat with them a little bit. You know the project, you have just written up this proposal. You can echo the language, do not repeat the language verbatim from your proposal, but kind of echo it. Even if you give them just some draft ideas, some language, it's going to help them. We're all busy. Gives them something to start with, and you can't edit nothing. Should be addressed correctly, although often this is simply, to the grant review committee. As mentioned in the last slide, concrete support is going to be better than cheerleading. The text should repeat ideas from your proposal. We just mentioned that. And I like when I write a letter of support to conclude with the ask. It's not generally as direct as an ask you might do in a fundraising appeal, But generally, I like to conclude with, we're fully in support of this proposal, and we hope that you will fund this worthy project. So in essence, asking the grant committee, saying them, we really hope you're going to give the funding for this. So before we move on, any questions on letters of support?
We have a question from Laura Benton. Would a letter from the library board work?
That's a tricky one. Wouldn't hurt, but it's not what I would definitely call a letter of support, because in essence, the library board is asking for the money. If this is the library asking for money, then in essence, the library board is asking for the money. So that is not going to be as much a letter of support as a outside entity. You are probably going to address the board and their support more in your organizational credibility. Amy's situation for the rodeo, yes, letters from parents or a stock contractor. Is there, if this is serving youth, providing opportunities for youth, is there a youth organization who could say that, yes, these kids need something to do, or the school district, public school library? I think in that case, public school library, yes, I would have the school write the letter on that one. I would say yes on that one. The school would write the letter. Any other questions? Breakout number 2 is letters of support. And who can you ask for letters of support? And what would you like to see included in each one of them, specific to that supporter? And we are going to open all rooms. Okay, it looks like we have people back. Were there takeaways? Did you get any ideas for different people to ask for a letter of support? Any questions that came up you'd like to share in the chat box?
We have one question from Deanna. Can you use the beneficiary or grant funds for a letter of support, such as an assisted living home with, sorry, it keeps moving.
Would receive large print. Yeah, I would. Yeah, because they're going to reinforce your need pretty distinctly. And they are also, in essence, they're a partner. I mean, they're not a passive participant. They're going to probably have to do something as part of the project. Okay, Rachel says local interest groups, writing classes. Youth advisory group, yes.
Susan, there's a question from Corey. If you're writing a grant for a city project, who would you get a letter from?
What is the project? It really depends on the project. I think you look at who is going to be served, and I keep coming back from youth because it's just so easy to get money for youth. If it's some kind of youth project, you might want to, look to the Boys Girls Club or somebody else that looks to, school administrators. That's a good idea, Cynthia. Make a park ADA accessible, and it's the mayor projecting the project. Are there any state, maybe a state agency that deals with disability issues that you could look to? Is there any kind of a support group for people with disabilities? Something like that. You kind of have to brainstorm sometime in terms of who also looks at the same problem. Oh, that's a good one. Local Facebook groups for families with disabled children. That's a great idea, Rachel.
There's a question from Julie. I have never been asked for a letter of support. How does one incorporate into grant?
It would be part of your attachments. It would be only if the grantor allows it. I have done grants, Arts Council grants here in Wyoming. I do not call for letters of support. It's going to depend on the guidelines, but it would go in the grant attachment. So your summary, your narrative, your budget, all of that, if you're doing free form, is 5 to 10 pages, or it's going to follow the grant guidelines. And then your letters of support go in the attachments.
We have another question from Rex. How does this letter of support match your mission grant request rather than an agency of business expressing report, but no obvious connection otherwise?
Well, you want people with a connection. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, Rex. Oh, that was a statement, not a question. Yes, okay. And then Eliza had a question, can a single support letter be from multiple people? You can have multiple people sign on a letter. I would not have the exact same letter coming from multiple sources. You do want the letters to be different, and you want them to kind of be tailored to your supporters in terms of, one supporter may be very familiar with your organization, having partnered with you. Another may be very involved with the target population. That would be my answer to that one. Is it better to have a letter you drafted? I always offer. They might want to write it all themselves. If they offer, at least send them your summary, so they have a better idea of what the project is and they don't go off the rails with writing a letter of support for something that's not exactly your project. Definitely offer to draft it. People are so busy and we've had much better luck. I know that when somebody asks us for a letter of support and they give me nothing, it's really hard. All I can kind of do is, yay, rah, we'll share it with the library community. And that's not the best letter I could produce for them. Let's keep going because we've got a lot yet to cover. So now you've done everything. You've put your whole thing together. Double check if you had the opportunity to do a preliminary proposal to have reviewed by a program officer. If you had a letter of intent that they gave you review or feedback on, have you addressed all weaknesses they called out? So make sure you go back. We went over this in session 1, but if they gave you feedback, by all means use it because they know what they're looking for. And if they are gracious enough to just tell you, you are in good shape. So we are on to the editing phase. So you really want to find people in a bad mood to offer you feedback. You really want to get as much negative feedback as possible before you submit. So one of the things to remember is that good grant writing is in essence good writing. It should be understandable, it should be clear, concise. You don't want to, even if they allow you 10 pages, if you don't need pages, don't go 10 pages. Very specific, very concrete, active voice. Always write from a stance of confidence when you write a grant proposal, and tell a really compelling story as to why you need this money and what good it will do in the world. Pare it down, get to the point, keep on track with what a reader will find interesting and not necessarily what you think is important to you. When I first learned grant writing, they talked about the grandma rule. Can you hand it to your grandmother and she'll understand it? And I think that's completely unfair to grandmothers. So I like to call it the oblivious other, that if you hand your grant proposal to someone who doesn't know your organization, doesn't know the project, doesn't know what you're trying to do, will they understand it? So watch out for words that sound the same and don't mean the same thing. So there can be a big difference between if there is a big difference between mourning when the sun rises and mourning the loss of a loved one. Misspellings that are real words. And these two, they're going to fly by spell check. And you will never forget it if you leave the L out of public and submit it. I've heard stories of that happening in newspapers. It's not a good day. So acronyms don't devolve into alphabet soup. You can only use so many acronyms before people's eyes swim, even if you define them up front. Avoid long, confusing sentences. Some people might use a tool such as Grammarly or Hemingway to kind of do this. You never want a sentence that just makes people scratch their heads. So, and then what you want to do, print it off and give it a rest. And this is another reason you don't want to procrastinate. When you have worked on it, your eyes will see what you think it says. You need to walk away from it for a day and then put fresh eyes on it after you've had a break from it. So some polishing tips. I think we have, in this era where we're all typing on phones, gotten more forgiving about typos. But the cleaner it is, the more polished it is, the better that's going to reflect on your organization and your professionalism and your capability. So proofread it, proofread it, proofread it. Just like with the budget where you want to triple check numbers, you want to triple check that the copy is clean. Ask more than one person to look at it, and again, preferably somebody who has not been involved in this process. A good trick is to pick it up and read it out loud, and that will really tell you if you've got a sentence that people will stumble across. I find it much better to print it off and read it on paper. In addition to looking at it on screen, your eyes will see different things in print than on screen. And know your own weaknesses. You will learn these over time. I'm too big a fan of the word that. Some people engage in adverb abuse, way too many adverbs. You'll kind of learn those over time. So, appearance counts. I was once handed a draft 2-page preliminary proposal that didn't have a single paragraph break, used every bit of the paper out to the margins, didn't have a bit of bold or subheads or anything. Give it some white space. If they can't read it well, it's going to make it harder for them to understand what you're trying to do. You can use subheadings, you can use bullet points. Don't you get cute with a font. You want a good size font. If they only give you 2 pages and you have 2.5 pages of material you're starting out with, I don't think you're going to cut it down to 9-point font and get away with it. They won't be able to read it. As I said, paragraph breaks, break it up, make it readable, make it flow. So if a cover letter is needed, you're obviously going to submit it on letterhead and address it to the proper recipients. Echo points from your summary. But again, just like letters of support, you want to echo, not completely repeat. The letter, if there's a cover letter, it gives you a chance to touch on any conversations you've had with the funder. It gives you the opportunity to invite them to ask questions. We'll be glad to answer any questions. Tell them you look forward to hearing from them. Thank them in advance for considering your proposal. So it gives you an opportunity to reinforce that summary, reinforce the relationship, and be a little more personal. Online grant applications, and this is something we touched on a little bit in the first session, but you really want to find your way around the interface early in the process. Familiarize yourself with it. Can you save it and come back? Do you need to do it all in one session? Be very cognizant of character limits. In an online application, it will just cut you off in midstream if you try to go too long. You want to draft, find out what those character limits are, draft your narratives in Word or Google Docs, and watch the character limits. Google Docs is a great tool if you want to work on a proposal with multiple people, because you can grant them suggesting rights, so they can comment and they can make suggestions, but not actually edit and alter. And that way you can, and they don't have to have a Gmail account for them to do this. So it gives you a great opportunity to collaborate with several people. So with an online grant application, submit it in advance. If you wait until the very last day and your internet goes down, or if you have trouble with the interface somehow, you're going to miss your opportunity. Just because it's open until 11:59 p.m. doesn't mean you have to wait until 11:58 to submit. And in an online grant application, they may ask the questions differently. You still want to try to communicate the information that we've gone over in the proposal components without straying completely for their questions. It's sort of a trick to writing it, that you sneak a little of this, that, and the other in if you need to. Obviously, answer their questions as they ask them, but keep in mind, all the elements of a grant proposal. So you've done all this work. You're waiting for the answer and you got it. So this is exciting. So what do you do now? Obviously, the very first thing you do is you thank whoever gave you the funding. You complete all the required paperwork and review all the requirements before you sign. If something comes up that's too onerous requirement that they did not have in their guidelines, you are not able to find out in advance, something you're just not going to be able to do, it is okay to decline a grant. So publicize the award. Make sure you follow their guidelines. Our federal grants, there is a certain size that we have to have, minimum size that their logo has to be. The Arts Council asks you to do different logos depending on the color of the background. So you want to get the word out, do a press release, put it out on your social media, but make sure you follow whatever guidelines. You want to loop them in. This continues with building the relationship. Add them to your newsletter list, and of course, publicize the grant award in your newsletter list. Interact with them on social media. If you announce it on Facebook, be sure that you tag them. As you go through, inform them immediately if there are any needed changes to the project or budget. They're usually willing to work with you as long as you're accomplishing what you set out to accomplish, and complete your reports completely and on time. So you will sleep better if you keep a record of your grant throughout the grant project rather than trying to scramble just before the reporting deadline. So keep a file, make sure you've got somebody keeping track of the financials. You're not rifling through a shoebox for receipts. So keep track of that as you go through. But this doesn't always happen. You might not have gotten it, and you're sad. You put all this work into it. Although I will tell you that no grant writing is ever wasted. You have learned something from this, and every time you write, it gets better. So why not? You might have put together a weak application. And this is where, again, that relationship with the funder comes in. Sometimes they will immediately tell you why it wasn't funded. You can reach out to them and find out why it wasn't funded. It's possible if you find out, you might be able to revise and submit to their next grant cycle and get it. Maybe it wasn't the right focus. It didn't match well enough to their priorities, which is where your research on the funder is going to come in really handy. That should hopefully avoid that problem. They weren't sure what your goals were. This could be a question of the writing, or it could be a question if you didn't set clear goals. Ineligible expenses or project type. This should be pretty readily evident when you look at their grant guidelines in advance, which you did do, right? But you'd be surprised how many times I've seen grant applications where they asked for something that the grant wasn't funding. You could have put together a really good proposal, but it was just a competitive grant cycle. And that's something that you may or may not be able to find out. But in that case, you've got a really good proposal to take on to the next funder. So budget might have been inaccurate. You might have formatted it incorrectly, might have missed the required attachments. Those things will get you kicked out. So any of those things might have gotten you the no. So what do you do now? You still thank the grantor. They took the time to look at your proposal, and then you ask for that feedback. And most times they're willing to get it. Review the proposal after the feedback and see what can you revise or reconsider, and then move on to the next funding opportunity. And I will still say no grant writing is ever wasted. Even if you didn't get it, you have developed language. I mean, you're not going to have to rewrite. If this is your first grant, you're not going to have to rewrite your organizational credibility from scratch the next time. You will have that language developed, and you may need to tweak and revise it for the next funder. Never submit to another funder without revising it and making sure that it's meets their guidelines and addresses their focus. But you have this in the file. You can use it later, and you have the experience of going through the full proposal, and it will be easier the next time. So with that, questions. I saw a lot of people sharing in the chat while I was talking out of the corner of my eye. So Sarah, were there any questions that came up in that, or do people have new questions?
There are no questions yet, but we'd be happy to take some.
You guys are good. You learned everything. Rachel makes a good point. Worst thing anyone can say is no. And I've heard the expression before that no means next. No means what do you do next? Oh, that's great. Through Gale courses, they have courses in grant writing for free. So if you have access to Gale courses, yep. And Lisa, answer is no if you don't even ask, if you don't even get brave and put it out there. And in Gale courses, she said they have grant courses in grant writing for free. And in that resources folder, we did go through it a little bit in the just open question and answer yesterday. There are a lot of links to free grant writing webinars, some that are paid. There was a TechSoup that does cost some that I did go through that was very good, felt it was worth the money. So there are a lot of resources. I encourage you to learn from a lot more people than just me, because you will get much different perspectives. And with that, Sarah, shall we conclude?
That's great. Thank you for joining us for session 5. Session 6, conversation with Dan Stokes, Director of State Programs at the NHPRC, is scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. And we'll see you soon.